What is going on, everyone? Welcome in to the next episode of my Summer Deep Dive series, where we take an in-depth look at all 32 teams leading up to my number one ranked team over the summer. And today, we reveal my 31st ranked LA Rams, a team in a very unique situation with several aging superstars coming off of injury, surrounded by a whole lot of question marks, to put it very nicely. It's going to be a very fascinating video to get into here. Really looking forward to this one. Before we do get started, I pour a lot into this series. This is all I've got going on this summer, so it's really important to me that these videos do well and continue to do well. And by you hitting that like button, it goes further than you know. It takes just a second. It's a free and easy way to support my channel. And do make sure you're subscribed if you enjoy the content. You're not going to want to miss any of these deep dive series as we lead up to my number one team throughout this summer. But let's go ahead and get into it, starting by recapping this team's key departures and additions. And a lot of starting snaps are leaving this team, really going with a youth movement here. Allen Robinson traded away to the Steelers. That signing certainly did not work out at wide receiver. David Edwards is a loss here. He only played about 4 games last year, but over the course of his rookie contract has been a quality starting guard for him. And then on that defensive line especially, Greg Gaines, who really came on late last year. A'Shawn Robinson was a key rotational starter up front. Leonard Floyd actually had a pretty good year last year. They lose him on the edge. And then as you go throughout this defense, I mean, seriously, you lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 starters on the defense. That is really what we're talking about with this Rams team, and a key reason why they're going to rank 31st here. But Bobby Wagner, who still played very well last year despite his age. Jalen Ramsey, of course, shipped off to the Miami Dolphins for a bag of peanuts. Troy Hill, another starting corner. 2 starting safeties. Taylor Rapp goes to Buffalo. Nick Scott to Cincinnati. Matt Gay, their kicker, as well, making special teams a question mark. And then some less concerning departures as well. Liam Cohen, their offensive coordinator, is going to go back to Kentucky and be replaced by Mike LaFleur, who Sean McVay is very familiar with, has spent a lot of time with him in this system. But Brandon Powell, their kick returner and a gadget receiver. Darrell Henderson, one of their starting running backs. Matt Skura, Ode Abushi, who were basically a starting guard last year between the two of them. And then David Long, a cornerback who kind of fell out of order last year, but could potentially be a starter for the Raiders this year. Another piece in that secondary who might have found starting work this year is not back. They do make some additions this year, though not too many, because they didn't have a first-round pick and weren't too busy in free agency. But what they do get is a bunch of guys back from injury, and not even listed here are Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Donald, who all missed the second half of last season, basically. And that's obviously going to be a big part of this team's success this year, is those 3 guys. So they'll be back, but even more significant, guys that essentially missed the entire season. Logan Bruce, third-round pick last year, might be starting at guard for them. Joseph Noteboom at left tackle, who got a big contract extension and then only played 5 games. Jordan Fuller, their best defensive player right now outside of Aaron Donald, only played 3 games last year. So this team was completely derailed by injuries last year. So at least getting some of those guys back as quote-unquote additions. But also through the draft in day 2, Steve Avila at the top of round 2, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, all guys I expect to be contributors in year 1. And then some smaller additions. They did get Hunter Long as their second bag of peanuts for Jalen Ramsey. Might be involved in 12 personnel. Puka Nacua, a 5th-round pick I really liked. He's going to probably see some opportunities this year. Stetson Bennett, a backup quarterback with Matthew Stafford's injury questions, could see some time this year. And then 9 other day 3 picks that we will be sure to cover as we go through this roster. But before we do that, I do want to talk about this coaching staff, how they rank stacked up against the rest of the league, and what the scheme is going to look like here in LA. So other than the three-pronged superstars that they have, Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald, they have another leg of that trident, if you will. Sean McVay is still a top 5 coach and a premium coach in this league. Now, last year, things fell apart, and he doesn't quite have the shine right now, and there's some coaches doing some really incredible stuff right now, but if you're going to look at this ranking of 31 and say that is way too low for the LA Rams, this is the reason right here, is this guy, Sean McVay. The argument would be this is a coach that's not going to let this be a bottom 3 team in the NFL. Well, I have some reasons to believe that, just as we saw at the end of last year, it might be a little bit too much for him to overcome this year. And, he even considered retirement because of the state of this roster. So I do have a ton of faith in who he is as a coach. Going to rank as the 5th overall head coach. They rank in that tier 2 of overall coach and culture. This is a team that has earned the benefit of the doubt, that did just win a Super Bowl a year ago. But, they've got a lot of work to do, and they've got, it's good that they got him back, obviously, because they do have a lot of work to do. As far as, what his scheme looks like with Mike LaFleur, these two are a package deal, really, with the offense. This is your classic wide zone Shanahan-style offense, where you're going to get an emphasis on stretch running and play action that is built to look like those stretch runs that can create chunk plays in the passing game by sucking in those linebackers. That's really the core aspect of a Shanahan-style offense. Now, one thing you do see with Sean McVay's offense that you see a little bit less of with, say, Kyle Shanahan, and I think this is the biggest differentiator of the two, is a much larger use of 11 personnel, being 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 running back, spreading out the offense and going with more quick game and empty. This started with Jared Goff and certainly has been something Matthew Stafford is very comfortable with. So in terms of like running stick and China routes and double slants, like your classic West Coast quick game stuff, you see definitely more of that in Sean McVay's offense as opposed to like Kyle Shanahan, but definitely those core aspects of the wide zone blocking scheme up front and the play action as well. And that's going to run its course here and be very effective. He's one of the best play callers in the league, knows when to mix things up, when to go play action, when the run game is working, what buttons are working, and when to press them. So as far as coaching and play calling is concerned, it's not a concern for the LA Rams. It's really about everything else here. Now, the one thing I will say about McVay is that I've never been overwhelmed by his impact as a run game coordinator, if you will, or just the run game on his teams in general. You watch Kyle Shanahan's run games, for example, and it's trap, it's counter, pin and pull. He mixes up so well, keeps the defense guessing. McVay, it almost feels predictable a lot of the times, honestly, when wide zone is coming, or at least that the next run is going to be wide zone. Like I said earlier, I think he syncs up when to run and when to pass quite well. But, he's still fine, or the Rams are still fine as far as run game coaching is concerned. Maybe Mike LaFleur can add some new sprinkles to it this year. But I did want to say that, I've never really thought of McVay's offenses as some greatly designed run schemes. It's more just the way the pass is set up. The run can be effective through that. But as we turn to the defensive side of things, Raheem Morris is a defensive coordinator I have a ton of respect for. And the Rams with Morris are going to rank in that tier 3 of really good defensive coached teams. Morris has been around the league forever. He's been a head coach back in 2007 for the Bucs. People forget about that. This is a guy that has seen every scheme in the entire book. And I do think in his heart of hearts, he can really vary up his play calls in the right way, which is what any good defensive coordinator should be able to do, is mix and match their defensive schemes on a week-to-week basis for how to attack any given offensive matchup. Now, with the personnel here and what he's going to be able to run, paired with the fact that Sean McVay has very clearly shown that he wants his defense to be ran in the Fangio style, the two-shell approach, bend, don't break type of defense, You pair that with a group of cornerbacks that, as we'll see later in the video, really can't run man-to-man coverage or shouldn't be able to. And I think we see, yet again, that soft, squishy, Fangio-style, quarters-heavy defense that is really vulnerable in the run game, vulnerable underneath. I have major concerns about this scheme as a whole, kind of quickly getting phased out of the NFL, and I would love to see the Rams in time mix this defensive approach up. I do have a long video about this, breaking down Fangio-style schemes and kind of what their strengths and weaknesses are. So if you have not seen that video yet, if you're new to the channel, couldn't recommend that video more, and a little bit of kind of some of the rough stuff that you might be able to expect this year for this Rams defense carrying into next year. But I do believe in Raheem Morris. He's just in a really tough spot, kind of being asked to run a scheme that he's not fully familiar with, but I think he's overall done a good job coaching this scheme, right? So he is a good one, and they're going to rank in that tier 3 of defensive coaching. So again, coaching not going to be a concern. Neither is culture for this Rams team. It's going to be the roster, and we're going to break down this roster. But before we do that, I got to tell you about my good friends at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is truly changing the game when it comes to fantasy football in 2 different ways. Number 1 is going to be best ball fantasy. Hey, what's the best part of fantasy football? It's draft day, right? You get together with your friends, you think about all day who you're going to pick, and then you just sit there all night staring at your new roster all night because you're so happy with it. Well, you can have draft day right now through Best Ball Fantasy. You can compete in Best Ball Mania 4, the biggest fantasy football competition literally of all time, and it is draft, set it, and forget it. No daily moves, no waiver wires, no trades. It's all about the draft. You can compete for huge winnings. I have loved doing Best Ball Fantasy. And on top of that, you can play daily pick'em contests and Underdog as well. And this is not just for the NFL. I've been playing this for every MLB game that I go to. You set your lineups anywhere from 2 to 5 picks, picking props, things like fantasy points, home runs, passing yards, points in basketball as we look at the NBA Finals coming up here. And again, massive payouts up to 20 to 1. So small entries with massive rewards that massively increase your interest in any given sporting event. I cannot swear by Underdog Fantasy anymore. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG, they will match up to $100 on your first deposit, and you'll support my channel in a big way in the process. So that's promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy. So we've been trashing this roster, and now it's time to take a look at each of these position groups, where their strengths and weaknesses are. Fortunately, as we start with the passing game outlook, this is really not where the weaknesses lie. Let's start with the quarterback conversation, which does need to be had here. So Matthew Stafford, just, for the second deep dive in a row, a injury-ridden conversation about what the quarterback room is going to look like. Now, Kyler is not throwing at the moment. Matthew Stafford is. It's almost the opposite, where you can expect Kyler to be available and ready later into the year, whereas Matthew Stafford, the question is going to be not if he can throw right now, because all reports are he's in shape and the arm looks good. Is his back and is his shoulder going to hold up? This is something that was evident in his final years in Detroit, where he started missing games, and now it shows up for the Rams as he's continued to take a beating on his body and gets older. Look, it's just the tough reality, Rams fans, that just like maybe Justin Fields has questions on if he can take that next step as a passer, on if CJ Stroud can step in as a rookie and have that play from Ohio State translate, just as other quarterbacks have question marks that ding their grade and their rating, Matthew Stafford's health adds a question mark that has to ding how you perceive him. Now, a healthy Matthew Stafford for me would rank as the 9th best quarterback in the NFL, and if they can get a full season of Matthew Stafford, they wouldn't rank 31st in the NFL. But this is the reality of the situation, and it's obviously going to add a lot of variance to this team's season. Now, as far as what Stafford is, if you could guarantee me that full bill of health, he would rank 9th for me in the NFL at quarterback. And, he's an interesting quarterback to talk about because more than, maybe any quarterback in the league right now, he is really hot and cold. And when they went on that Super Bowl run a year ago, they got 4 weeks of hot Matthew Stafford. And that's why he was able to prove that he's one of these quarterbacks that you can win a Super Bowl because of. Now, it very well could have gone the other way where, he's out there with his 2 or 3 interception games. He has random weeks where he's really inaccurate and the processing, the decision making, he's just not as locked in. I can't explain why it is, but this is really who Matthew Stafford has been throughout his career, which makes him difficult to rank. But one thing that's very different about like Stafford and his inconsistency compared to maybe like Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, Ryan Tannehill, those types of dudes, is when Stafford's inconsistent, it's much more about him having a bad week. Whereas like those other quarterbacks, it's much more about was the surrounding circumstance helping them that week. The process of Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins is much more consistent. It's much more about what's going on around them. Matthew Stafford, it's like, is he on that week, right? And when he's on, he's one of these quarterbacks that just, he anticipates throwing lanes extremely well. He makes throws that no coach would expect a quarterback to make. He'll change arm slots and rapid fire these shots in with incredible velocity into these tight windows that most quarterbacks just wouldn't even see or think about attempting. He can push the ball deep downfield. He can split quarters coverage over the top with the deep ball. He has decent instincts to sense pressure and get out of the pocket when he can. He's not the most mobile guy, but he can really extend plays and see throwing windows on the move as well. And when that's all working, just as we saw in that incredible Super Bowl run, he will elevate your offense. And that's why they, moved on from a guy like Jared Goff, who would be in that group more so that I described earlier with Prescott and Cousins, who are more dependent on the surrounding cast, where Stafford can really elevate that group. So that is something that is available to this team, but you also got to know you're going to get weeks where thinks he sees throwing windows that just aren't there. You're going to see weeks where random accuracy issues pop up. You're going to see weeks where he's forcing balls into double coverage. It just kind of is who he is every year. He's towards the top in turnover-worthy play percentage. But those good weeks are really special from Matthew Stafford. So when healthy, Matthew Stafford has shown, even going back to his times in Detroit, he's going to help this team stay competitive, really regardless of what the rest of the team looks like. But that's a big if with the health. And it's important to talk about the backup quarterbacks here, given that situation, and Stetson Bennett especially, who this team spent a 4th-round pick on. I ended up liking Stetson Bennett a hell of a lot more than I thought I would when I watched his Georgia tape. For the first 5 years of his career, he was really just this point guard, game manager type, especially in 2021. Georgia had that ridiculous defense. He didn't really have to do anything other than hand the ball off, throw screens, and run play-action boots. But in 2022, there was actually some moments where the defense faltered at Georgia, and Stetson Bennett really had to be a playmaker for that offense that, yeah, they have a lot of highly recruited players, but no one that had really emerged other than Brock Bowers as this game-breaking playmaker, right? All these receivers at Georgia were rotating, and at that point in time, really a bunch of no-names. I'm sure some of them will turn into good NFL players or prove that they were, but I was impressed by his ability to read the field and push the ball downfield. I was impressed by his arm talent that really surprised me. A lot of these smaller guys can't really command the football the way Stetson Bennett did. So I ended up liking him a lot more. I was definitely comfortable with him in this 4th to 5th round range, and he makes a lot of sense. Man, I was saying before the draft, if anybody in this draft is going to be this year's Brock Purdy and come in and play point guard and, make some plays happen with his feet on 3rd down, it was going to be Stetson Bennett, who's ready to go right now, just like Brock Purdy, who had started a million games at Iowa State. Stetson Bennett, very similar. Bennett's a little more athletic, but I would say not as comfortable passing from the pocket. Bennett, much more first read and run, whereas Brock Purdy actually has a natural pocket presence to keep his eyes downfield while he navigates pressure. So there's a substantial difference there as far as Bennett becoming a real starter, like Purdy is making a case to be in San Francisco. But when you talk about the system that they run, coming in, doing the Shanahan stuff, the point guard ball handling stuff with the play fakes and the play action jets, play action boots and all that stuff. I really think Stetson Bennett can win some games for this Rams team, especially as we look at this group of weapons. They have some players here and some definite upside as well. So they're going to rank 23rd for me with the weaponry. But I definitely think some of these guys can grow and get this group into the mid to high teens. And having Cooper Kupp there definitely helps, right? Like, he is an elite weapon. Now, I don't think of him in this quite the same way that I think of like Devontae Adams or Justin Jefferson, where you can really put him at any position, ask him to run any route. He can, take the top off the defense, run every route in the entire playbook. He doesn't quite offer that schematically speaking. But if you want to ask, like, who is the best at any given spot in the NFL, Cooper Kupp might be the best slot receiver out of, if this makes sense. He might be a better slot receiver than, say, Justin Jefferson or Devontae Adams are at any given wide receiver alignment, if that makes any sense. But anyway, the one thing that I think people misread on Cooper Kupp is thinking that he doesn't have elite traits. No, he's not the fastest guy. He's not a true deep threat. He's not even the most dynamic route runner, like I said, with guys like Devontae Adams, for example. But he does have elite traits. Number one is his size. He is close to 6'2", 210 pounds. He is not going to be disrupted by physical contact down the field and at the catch point. He is a literal brick wall down the field, and that matters for corners. It's still a physical sport in the receiving game, and he's as physical as any receiver in the league, both in his route running and at the catch point. So he's got an elite trait there. The other thing he doesn't get enough credit for is he might have the best 0 to 60 acceleration out of any receiver in the league. He's partially built like a running back in his lower half, and he has that similar ability to get to top speed quickly. And that's part of what makes him so successful out of the slot is, if Stafford's able to lead him upfield, he can really get from, point A to point B in about a 10-yard area better than pretty much anyone in the league. And he's big to run through arm tackles and fight for tough yardage as well. So when he's catching stick routes and whip routes and hitches and crossers and slants and all this stuff that he does from the slot, he makes the most out of those relative to anybody at this position. So Cooper Kupp is nasty. He's a reason. There's a very big reason, a very good reason. He led the NFL in receiving yards a year ago and was on pace to do so again last year, more or less, before he got hurt. Now, he's getting up there in age. He's on the other side of 30 now and is coming off a pretty serious injury. So it's not enough for me to put a medical check on him, so to speak, but it is something that I guess keep an eye on is regression due for Cooper Kupp, and does that first step acceleration drop off, does a little bit of that speed drop off now that he's getting up there in age. But that's why Van Jefferson getting the up arrow here is really important, and is a huge year for Van Jefferson, not just because it's a contract year for him, second-round pick out of Florida 3 years ago, but this is the first year where he actually has a clear opportunity at the wide receiver 2 spot. He came in where they had Cooper Kupp and they had Robert Woods, and then last year they really unnecessarily gave this job to Allen Robinson, where Van Jefferson, to me, rightfully deserved to be the number 2 wide receiver last year. Whenever he's called upon, he seems to step up. And last year, as Robinson wasn't out there, Cooper Kupp wasn't out there, Van Jefferson really stepped up. And if the quarterback play was any better, he might have had his breakout last year. So to me, Van Jefferson is definitely somebody I'm targeting in all of my fantasy leagues in whatever format that is, whether that's underdog or dynasty redraft, clean redraft, whatever it is. The opportunity is going to be there. I think the talent is there. This is a guy that's an excellent route runner. He can threaten vertically. The biggest knock on him is going to be ball skills, where you do see some inconsistencies in his game, but there's room to improve that. man, I really hope Matthew Stafford looks at Van Jefferson in the same role that Odell Beckham really came in and dominated as that flanker, that wide receiver, running the backside digs and the deep posts on the backside, the alerts. And he could really blow up this year and earn a big contract, which would be a huge win for the Rams in a bit of a retooling season. And then, we could have really put Ben Skoranek or Tutu Atwell up here as the wide receiver 3. I went with Skoranek because I believe he's going to out-snap Tutu Atwell because of what he does as a run blocker, where he's one of the best run-blocking receivers in the NFL. He's basically a glorified tight end. He's the Allen Lazard role, the Nick Westbrook-Akine role, the Jawan Jennings role. We see this in all of these Shanahan-style offenses, basically. A big-bodied receiver that's willing to block from the slot, from the wing, come down on split zone, pull outside on tosses, and block on screens and all that. And he does all the dirty work. And he rewarded the Rams by making some pretty nice plays in the receiving game in the last couple games of last season. He's not a separator, but in the same way that like Allen Lazard can get open against zone and, come down with, well, Allen Lazard's not the best example, but maybe Jawan Jennings or Nick Westbrook-Akine, who are also slow wide receivers. They can still come down with tough contested catches and be a decent third option out there that you live with not being the best separator because there's such a good impact in the blocking game. But Tutu is going to be the guy that comes in third down situations, and I was so pleasantly surprised by Tutu Atwell's tape for all of the jokes of him being overdrafted here for the Rams, and he certainly was and hasn't returned that impact. He got open, man, and he is fast as shit. He's faster than I thought he was. A lot of guys run 4.3, and you just don't see that speed on film. Tutu's got it, and he's definitely a twig. He's not going to be maybe never even going to be a full-time starter, but I think he can be as a third option, as a vertical threat and a gadget player. But when he gets out there, he's going to separate. And if Matthew Stafford's throwing him accurate passes, because his catch radius isn't all that big, you got to put it on the money. But, he can definitely be an impact. He's the fastest receiver they have as a deep threat, and I'm excited to see what plans Sean McVay has for him in year 3. Definitely another guy that could break out here with Van Jefferson and really create a pretty dynamic, really foursome of wide receivers there. Now, there's downside because of the size and the lack of production. But after reviewing the film, my tone on Tutu Atwell has really changed. I thought he was a complete flop. His tape is good. There's something there if they can tap into it. And then they take Puka Nacua in the 5th round. Really loved this pick. I was surprised they didn't go wide receiver earlier, but again, after reviewing this team, I get it a little bit more. I think they like these pieces they have here. But Puka is a very talented player who just can't stay healthy. He couldn't stay healthy in his last year at BYU and struggled to get through the pre-draft process. Only made it through about a half a day of practice at the Senior Bowl, but an excellent route runner, tracks the deep ball well. He gave me some vibes of like Romeo Doubs as a prospect, but again, just, couldn't get through the pre-draft process. His 40 time, I think he ran I could be wrong about this, but I think he ran like a 4.62. He plays faster than that. So, someone that if he can get healthy, and it sounds like he is now healthy and making waves in training camp, definitely another player to keep an eye on here. So there's like 3 receivers that I think have upside, and with Cooper Kupp getting up there in age, that's important. I think Austin Trammell probably also makes this team. He brings them a backup slot option, and really just a slot option that they don't necessarily have. He's a better short game separator than like Tutu is. So I think Austin Trammell will make this team. He got out there and made some plays for this team down the stretch last year. So that's probably going to be our 6. Not much to really add about the rest of this group. But let's talk about the tight ends. So Tyler Higbee, really not much to say. He's your classic starting possession Y tight end, decent blocker, run your stick routes, attack the middle of the field, come down with tough catches, move the chains. He is what he is. You've got Hunter Long, built in the exact same archetype, just unproven, who they traded as a part of the Jalen Ramsey trade, was a 3rd round pick for the Dolphins. I think Hunter Long could very easily replace Tyler Higbee if and when they want that to happen. Honestly, Higbee is not a bad pro comp for Hunter Long. So we'll see if he can reach that upside. I would say very similar things about Davis Allen, who I liked out of Clemson. He's a little bit slower even than Higbee and Hunter Long are, but I think he's a better run blocker than both of those two guys, and I think he's better at contested catches than both of those two guys, although Hunter Long was pretty good at that at Boston College. But I like the Davis Allen pick in the 5th round. And you really have 3 guys built in this archetype of slower possession tight ends, jack of all trades, master of none types. And then you've got Brycen Hopkins, who I mentioned last because he's your speed threat at tight end when they go 12 personnel. You know, Sean McVay prefers to be more of an 11 personnel Shanahan style system with 3 wide receivers on the field. But if he wants to go more 12 personnel and have that sort of Jonnu Smith type, if you will, the guy that can leak out on play action, run those deep crossers and show a little bit more speed, Brycen Hopkins can be that guy. Not a good run blocker and really hasn't established any consistency in the receiving game throughout his career going back to college, but I do think there's talent there. It's a pretty good tight end room, honestly, with Higbee and 3 guys that are just unproven. And then not much to say about these receiving backs either. Cam Akers was good in the receiving game at Florida State, but has been just a guy in the receiving game in the NFL. Honestly, I think there's just a general awareness factor lacking with Cam Akers, and sometimes that shows as far as like setting blocks up on screens or being consistent with his hands or being a great route runner. It just hasn't really all come together for him, but he is a good athlete with some explosiveness and certainly some upside in the receiving game if something could click this year in year 4. But Kyren Williams is kind of the opposite. He has all of the instincts in the world. He's a phenomenal route runner and sure hands and instinctive after the catch, but genuinely one of the least gifted athletes at the position in the league. He's tiny and slow, and for that reason, he's easier to tackle in space because you can stay in front of him easier, and he doesn't have a lot of play strength. But I do think we see a lot of Kyren Williams this year. He might even be their starting 3rd down back. He's also a much better pass protector than Cam Akers, so it might have been fair to actually place Kyren Williams as the starting 3rd down back. But let's see them do that from a workload perspective first. Zach Evans was fine at Ole Miss in the receiving game. Again, kind of like Cam Akers, 5-star guy, has a little bit of a lack of in-game instincts and awareness about him. They clearly have a type with those highly recruited guys. And then Ronnie Rivers is an instinctive guy out of Fresno State who's not the most special athlete, but he is quick. And if he makes this team, could be a nice relief option in the receiving game. Tyon Evans is a fascinating player, but much more for his running potential as an undrafted pickup. So definitely some question marks with Tutu and Van Jefferson as far as can they reach some of their upside. Dinging this ranking a little bit in a league that has a lot of really talented receiving rooms. You also aren't getting a ton from your tight end and your running back as far as dynamism. So they're going to rank 23rd with the upside certainly to be in the top half of the league if Tutu and Van Jefferson hit, because that's a 3 set of different skill sets that I think could really play well together if it all comes together. Now let's talk about the offensive line that is certainly not the best. It's not the worst, the common saying is you're only as good as your weakest link, and they don't necessarily have a huge weak link other than if Logan Bruce is named the day 1 starter at right guard. We'll talk about that, but in theory, you have 5 starting caliber players here in a scheme that's going to protect these guys and make it so this isn't the biggest issue in the world. But you also just don't have a lot of impactful players here. Rob Havenstein being the one good starter in this group, and even then, he's a bottom half right tackle in the NFL. Maybe, I don't know, I don't have a list in front of me, but he's probably in that 18 to 22 range. So he's, again, still a good player, but nothing crazy. But let's go from left to right here. You got Joe Noteboom, who still has upside. They paid him kind of on the Jordan Mailata contract for the Eagles, where he hadn't quite broken out yet, but they were expecting it to happen with more playing time and coaching. And it just didn't happen for him in that first year like it did for Jordan Mailata, which is potentially really unfortunate for the Rams if he doesn't take that next step this year, because he's a really expensive, basically replacement level starter. He's someone I still believe in, but even when he was healthy last year, there was a lot of issues. The footwork in pass protection, the hand usage, still not all there. As a run blocker, he's pretty good. I don't really have any knocks on him there. He hasn't necessarily proved to be a dominant guy, but, you're not necessarily worried about it, but you're definitely not stoked for him at left tackle. He's going to be one of the lower level left tackles in the NFL heading into the 2023 season with a lot to prove, really everything to prove to this team. A former third-round pick, though, and a good athlete with upside. At left guard, you've got Steve Avila, who I liked Steve Avila at the end of the second round, at the beginning of the third round. I think he's a high floor, lower upside, kind of bruising lineman. He's a rock in pass protection. He's got good feet, and I'm not worried about what he's going to be in pass pro in the true drop back game, but it was an interesting pick to me. Not only did I think it was a little bit early, I would have much rather gone with a John Michael Schmitz, kick him out to guard. If you were going to go with a bigger guy, Osiris Torrance, I had my criticisms of this pick. It's not that I think he's going to be a bad player. He's going to be just fine for the Rams. But I also question how he's going to fit this blocking scheme. Honestly, a big reason I'm lower on Steve Avila is I hated his get-off in the run game. I really did. I thought he was slow off the ball in any scheme that TCU ran. Now, we'll see how it looks in a wide zone offense with different coaching. Certainly could improve that. They were much more of a head-up inside zone and gap style run game at TCU. But I'm worried about his ability to reach a 5 technique or reach a 1 technique over the center, where if those guys are getting across his face, you will get some really disruptive blow-ups in the run game. And I would keep an eye on that being an issue for them. I don't think he's a sensational athlete, especially in the run game. So I think if you wanted a guy that's going to help when you go empty and you need true pass protection, certainly was a better option even than Osiris Torrance right now. But I think he's got a floor about him, and I'm not stoked about him being the 34th pick in the draft. I think it was fine. They needed to fill this spot, and I get it. But I think the expectations for him are going to be a little bit too high, and we'll see how that ages, right? Not trying to slander it, but I just don't think he's ever going to be a Pro Bowl guard or anything like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Brian Allen at center is one of the most average offensive linemen in the league. As far as centers are concerned, he's a little bit undersized, so the play strength isn't great, but the effort and athleticism is pretty good. Centers tend to get sheltered in pass protection with double teams, especially in a system like this where it's so much wide zone play action, setting up, with moving pockets. You're not worried about him, but he's also not a people mover or anything physically imposing up front either. And he will get bullied if left one-on-one against the better nose tackles in the league. Coleman Shelton is my projected starter at right guard. I know they spent a third-round pick on Logan Bruce, who tore his ACL before he really got a chance last year. I could totally be wrong about this, and it could be Logan Bruce, and Logan Bruce could be a stud, and they see something I don't. But to me, Coleman Shelton was their day one starter at right guard because Bruce went down, and he played pretty well. He has center flexibility. He's pretty good in pass protection, and fine in run blocking. I think if they start Logan Bruce, it's because they view him as a better run blocker, and I certainly could get behind that. He's just a better athlete with better play strength. But I think Coleman Shelton really earned this job last year, and they'd be smart if they're trying to keep Matthew Stafford upright to keep that continuity there. And then, Rob Havenstein at right tackle kind of is what he is. He's getting up there in age, 31 years old. He's been a guy that's been really up and down. I think his lack of athleticism just makes him a little bit matchup dependent. He doesn't have the best feet or posture in pass protection, but he's tough and strong. So, he's really just good across the board, and that rounds out your offensive line. Now, if Logan Bruce is starting at right guard, I think you're going to have some more polarizing results at right guard. especially in pass protection, where I didn't think he was developed coming out of Wisconsin, and obviously hasn't had a lot of time to get reps against NFL competition. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. He does have upside, and you never want to bet against a Wisconsin offensive lineman. Case in point, Rob Havenstein at right tackle, who I think was like a 5th or a 6th round pick. So, we'll see who ends up starting there at right guard. Bruce would be the upside play, the build for the future play. Coleman Shelton would be the let's not let Matthew Stafford tear his shoulder by week 4 play. They also draft Warren McClendon on day 3 of the draft. Interesting prospect. I think, if he was anywhere but Georgia, really, he would have been hyped up a little bit more. It sounds weird to say that, but they had a 5-star waiting in the wings, and they started to rotate Warren McClendon in and out of the lineup by kind of like basically the last 6 weeks of the season at Georgia. And I thought McClendon was having a pretty good year. He's kind of, I don't know if it's just because he wears the neck collar or what, but his posture is kind of weird. He is a leaner, but he is a good athlete. I thought his play strength was pretty good. I thought his play strength honestly went kind of pound for pound with what Broderick Jones had to offer. And he definitely fits this system. Someone to keep an eye on as a potential starter down the road. He's still young. He declared as a true junior because he knew he wasn't going to be starting with that 5-star waiting in the wings. Someone that, he obviously got good coaching at Georgia, but if he was more of a full-time starter, maybe someone that is a diamond in the rough type of dude because of his unique situation, I suppose. Now, losing out to any offensive lineman at the college level isn't great, but there's something there in Warren McClendon. We'll see what they can get out of him. Then you've got Alaric Jackson, A.J. Arcuri. Jackson actually played pretty well at guard for this team last year. Could be another option at right guard. Right tackle, though, his tape hasn't been good at all, so I guess it's wait and see on him. He was another really highly recruited guy that went to Iowa and was kind of out of shape, declaring out of the Big Ten. And, if things have clicked for him, there is something there. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on as well. Beyond that, Arcuri I'm not too familiar with. Ankrum, undersized, scrappy guy that's a backup. And then Zach Thomas is a nasty run blocker, was at San Diego State, but he is limited as an athlete, which hurts his ability to be a dominating run blocker and certainly hurts him in pass protection. So I like Zach Thomas. We'll see if he makes this team. They do get a slight bump in their run blocking from Cooper Kupp and Ben Skoronski. I mean, these guys maul dudes from the wing, crack blocks, toss blocks, even going like split zone. I mean, did I say Skoronski? Ben Skowronek, he'll seriously, he'll come down and block a defensive end. He doesn't care. He knows why he's out there, and it's to be a blocker. He was the same thing at Notre Dame, and he's going to give it his all, and he's got good play strength for a wide receiver. So, they really do help out, even if these tight ends aren't the best run blockers, honestly. Higbee has not been the dominating run blocker that he could be, and everyone else is unproven, to say the least. Although I will say Davis Allen, if he ever becomes the starter here, I thought was a really good run blocker at Clemson. Might be even a bigger upgrade there. But, 29th for pass protection, 28th for run blocking. It sounds low for, like, the fact that they don't have any true eyesores on this offensive line. But the lack of, like, star talent definitely, like, basically across the board, these guys will lose. Even if they don't have glaring weaknesses, they have guys that their win rates are going to be lower than, teams with star players, for example. And a lot of offensive lines are filling out quite nicely around the league right now. So it's not a massive concern, but it's definitely not a strength of this team relative to the rest of the league either. And then we round out the offense by talking about the rushing threats here. So, Cam Akers, it's really just a sad story of injuries. His rookie season was incredibly promising. This is a former 5-star, a guy that I was lower on at Florida State. I had a 3rd-round grade on him, but I did think was a bit of a reach in the 2nd round just because his vision wasn't great, his production wasn't great at Florida State, but he did have a horrible offensive line, and he's a great athlete. So they take him in the 2nd, and by the end of his rookie season, he was unstoppable. I mean, his playoff game against the Packers was one of the best running back performances in recent playoff memory. But unfortunately, the injury, I believe in the offseason of that following year, and just honestly has not looked like that dynamic player. And you take the dynamism out of a guy in Cam Akers who doesn't have the best vision and isn't the most instinctive runner, and he's a jag. He's just a guy. He's got still good athleticism for the position, but it's not that next level, borderline elite athleticism that had him drawing Dalvin Cook comps coming out of Florida State. You know, he's fine as a runner. Not going to hold them back. Not going to really, get you all that excited. Now, there is some hidden upside if after 2 years it was an Achilles injury, right? Maybe sometimes they say Achilles take 2 years. If in a contract year he can get back to his full athletic ability, you got something there, right? But I'm not expecting it in year 4. That would just be house money, a pleasant surprise. I'm expecting, honestly, not a whole lot from this running back group. They rank 22nd. I'm expecting Cam Akers to maybe start okay, and then either, I hate to say it, but either he gets hurt or banged up, or they start to rotate some of these other guys in and kind of start to see what Zach Evans has to offer, who is another, kind of similar prospect to Cam Akers. Akers was definitely more explosive than Zach Evans was, but Evans a 5-star prospect that just wasn't all that productive at Ole Miss. Now, I think Akers is much more creative in space than Zach Evans is as well, so I'm not trying to completely compare these guys together. That might even be disrespectful at that point to Cam Akers. But as far as being a 5-star recruit that never quite realized their potential, that's going to be Zach Evans. I don't really see it in him. I think he's a career backup type who's got decent power for what he is. But again, not the most elusive guy, certainly not the most creative guy. Kyren Williams is... like I said with the receiving game, it applies to what he is as a runner. He's got great vision. He's just so small and easy to tackle, and he's not explosive. So if he's in there, it's like, well, maybe we can get 6 yards out of this if it's well blocked. Like, that's kind of what you're looking at with him. I think he's kind of capped as a runner, where he has upside as maybe as a receiving back. But then you got Ronnie Rivers, kind of a poor man's Kyren Williams. And then Tyon Evans, I would say keep an eye on Tyon Evans. I wouldn't be stunned if Tyon Evans in this system is a better runner than Zach Evans as an undrafted pickup. He's this bizarre build. He's 5'9", 225 pounds, but he's fast as hell. I think he ran like a 4.49 at that size. He's basically like, I hate to even suggest this to an undrafted free agent, but he's physically speaking like baby, Derrick Henry, as far as the long speed and the girth. So in a wide zone blocking scheme, he's definitely fascinating and someone to keep an eye on, like deep dynasty leagues, stash him on your taxi squad or whatever, because I think the opportunity could come this year if he makes the team. As far as what they're getting from the QB, you get a slight bump from Matthew Stafford being a really good threat as a play action boot guy. And then, because that does help the numbers in the run game, especially in a wide zone blocking scheme, because that backside defensive end can't collapse down on it. So a slight boost there. But then Stetson Bennett, if he were to play, I think you have a really nice weapon there, and would be fun to see what Sean McVay might be able to scheme up. He hasn't really done a lot with mobile quarterbacks, with Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, as far as designing that type of stuff. But he's shown some fascination with it with guys like Bryce Perkins, Stetson Bennett, John Walford famously got the start over Jared Goff in that playoff game against Seattle. So I think he's intrigued by the idea of more design run stuff, but something that hasn't necessarily been fully tapped into with these Rams. So to break down the offense as a whole, they're going to rank 17th in terms of passing game. I think that's the biggest strength they have going for them, and they have even added upside to that. I think if Matthew Stafford stays healthy and these receivers get healthy with this play calling, I think they have just enough pass protection in front of them that this could actually be a top 10 passing game. I mean, in its best case scenario. But that's really tough to project. That's a everything goes right situation right? That's the right guard. Questions are answered. Stafford stays healthy. Kupp is 100%. Tutu takes a step up. Van Jefferson takes a step up. That's a lot to ask. Even maybe Joseph Noteboom takes a step up. Like, there's talent here, but it's going to be up to Stafford staying healthy and McVay realizing it. The run game, I'm just not very excited about across the board. I talked earlier, I don't think they scheme up things all that well. I don't think, Cam Akers has inspired a ton of faith that he's going to be anything other than a solid starter. The offensive line is concerning from a run block perspective. There's just a lot of much better teams in the run game. There just are. So overall, right now, they rank 21st offensively, but we're going to have a much more pessimistic outlook as we talk about this defense. They're horrible, really, across the board, other than Aaron Donald. And even Aaron Donald is coming off, he's 31 years old, coming off a serious injury. And showed signs of regression last year. So this is really horrible. They stack right up with the Cardinals as far as just horrible defenses. You might wonder, how are these teams, if you do the law of averages, I think the Cardinals were, best case, 22nd offense, or 20, what were they, 20th offense, 32nd defense. Here we have, 21st offense, 31st defense. Law of averages would tell you that's the 26th team in the league or whatever. Well, the way that happens, the way these teams come out to 31 and 32, is these defenses are a full tier or two below whatever the next defense is in the league. These teams have massive issues on the defensive side of the ball. The Rams are just like the Cardinals there. So let's go through it. The D-line, they're going to rank 19th because they have Aaron Donald. And we don't even really need to cover Aaron Donald, honestly. He gets plenty of attention, both in the media and from opposing offensive lines. Nobody gets doubled as much as Aaron Donald. And the fact that he's still able to produce at a high level despite that, it's honestly the best way to even sell this is that's the number one reason why I view him as the best defensive player of all time. And, maybe I'm biased because I didn't grow up watching Lawrence Taylor, but Aaron Donald has spent 6 straight years as the best player in football. He's literally unblockable one-on-one. And to me, that is enough to make that statement. Now, last year, he took a step down. His pressure rate and win rate were a little bit lower, but he was still drawing all those double teams. He's 31 years old now. So, eventually he's not going to be the best player in football, but he was still one of the 2 or 3 best interior rushers on a per snap basis. Still would have ended with 80 pressures, 16 sacks. He still would have been a first-team All-Pro in the worst year he's had in 6 years. That's the type of player we're talking about with Aaron Donald. And despite him having literally a bunch of XFL and fourth stringers surrounding the rest of the defensive line here, they still rank 19th. Because not only is he going to win on his own, but the Aaron Donald effect is real. And it might not show up in the stat sheet, but you have to account for it because if you're a defensive coordinator drawing up blitzes and stunts and you know exactly where the protection is going to shift, it is such an asset as far as scheming up phantom pressure, and you have a good coordinator in D'Amico Ryans to do that. So you're going to see a lot. You're going to see Byron Young come unblocked. You're going to see these blitzing linebackers and D-backs come unblocked because they know exactly where the protection is shifting, and you can attack that once or twice a game and get an unblocked pressure out of it. So that definitely counts. And then as far as Donald as a run defender is concerned, he's not the truly elite presence that he is as a pass rusher, but he's still one of the best run defending defensive tackles in the league. He is so strong for his size. You don't apply the typical undersized concerns to him. When he gets a hold of his blocker, he can decimate them in the run game. He can throw them aside, shed on demand, and he's quick to stay in front of guys for tackles as well. Now, if he gets double teamed and down blocked, he can get, pushed off the spot a little bit more than you like, especially if he's asked to play truly inside. But that's really your only true knock on him. and it's not even really all that much of a knock. Like, every 3 technique struggles against double teams. It just kind of is what it is. But beyond him, let's just go from left to right. Byron Young comes in as a 3rd-round pick, a truly raw 25-year-old prospect, which typically wouldn't be a 3rd-round pick, but when you run a 4.4 and you're new to football like Byron Young is, you're going to draw some intrigue. This guy really has only been playing high-level football for a couple years. He came to football late after working at a dollar store, read a flyer, and then walked on some military academy, and then worked his way to Tennessee. He's still learning pass rushing moves is really what it's all about. But from a speed, get off, ability to convert speed to power, those flashes are there. The upside's still there, but it's going to have to happen quickly, right? It's why he's a little bit of a tough sell as a 3rd-round pick, but it's also hard to argue with it too much when it's a guy that's this athletic. So all eyes will be on him. The opportunity couldn't be any more clear for him to, get the snaps and get the time to develop here. You look at the rest of this group, though, it's like, are they really not going to try to bring Robert Quinn back or, do something else, bring in a Shelby Harris or something with this D-line? Because it is so rough. Let's stick with the edge group, and then we'll revisit the interior D-line to wrap this all up. But Michael Holt is an interesting player. He's listed at 310 pounds. I don't believe it. I think he's more like 280. He's a bigger-bodied edge guy that plays stand-up edge. He's not horrible out there. Like, he's got some speed to power. He can actually win with a rip move, and he can defend the run well, certainly, at his size, and that's still getting proved out. He's not played a ton of snaps in his career. Interested to see where they play him, what his true playing weight is. Are they asking him to beef up and play interior? All that, to me, is kind of to be determined, but, he's fine as a rotational player, but as a starter, you're really concerned about that. Then you've got Nick Hampton, who's kind of your undersized, on-ball linebacker type. He's got some pass rush moves coming out of Appalachian State, but is it going to translate? I don't know, honestly. He does have a nice first step, and with guys like Josh Uche having success in the league, it's you can't just rule it out for a guy under 240 pounds to be a good pass rusher. And even Uche is like 240. It's just, and obviously you've got like Hassan Reddick doing what he's doing. There are outliers at this size who are able to get after the quarterback, and he certainly did it in college at a lower level of competition, but that's going to be your biggest question for him. And then the size against the run, but there's something there. We'll see what he can do translating into the next level. Ojuan Mathis was kind of a dart throw at length, honestly. Really not a productive player or a guy that has any idea what he's doing in both phases of the game, but does have nearly 36.5-inch arms, so they're going to gamble on that. Daniel Hardy was a 7th-round pick last year, didn't show much. This is truly an XFL caliber edge group, and I'd be surprised if they didn't bring in a veteran, whoever might be available right now. The interior group is fine. It's actually interesting to me, but outside of Bobby Brown, everybody's just a bunch of kind of undersized tweener types, or at least guys that have to play 3-tech. That's why I list Bobby Brown as the starter, because he's the only guy here that could actually potentially hold up as a nose tackle for them. Now, he showed flashes last year, and he was always a guy that was going to take a year or two to come along. Entering year 3 for Bobby Brown now, and I think he did what he could with what he was asked to do, which wasn't much. He only played 164 snaps, but some really good games last year against Seattle, against the Raiders, and the signs are definitely there that things are coming together for him, and that's definitely promising. It's a really tough position to play, especially in a scheme like this, where it's going to be a ton of 4-man fronts, asking him to eat double teams, and, he just might never grade out all that well. Kenny Clark in Green Bay, I bring this up because the schemes are almost identical, and from a physical profile perspective, Bobby Brown kind of looks like Kenny Clark, but Kenny Clark suffers the same thing in Green Bay, where he just doesn't grade out all that well in run defense because the ask is so difficult when you're playing with 2 interior players always against the run. So it's going to be interesting to see what he can do. He really hasn't put anything together as a pass rusher. He has theoretical upside there, as far as his length and get off and athleticism is concerned. Hopefully Aaron Donald can really get in his ear and help him come along this year. He's an excellent mentor and coach for that position. So, the flashes are there. We'll see. You've got a couple of guys that rotated as 3 techs, as 5 techs last year that I think will do the same in Copeland and Jonah Williams. When they do go to those five-man fronts, it's usually in more of a 5-1 defense as opposed to a 3-4 type of defense. But you will see both Copeland and Jonah Williams out there, and both guys are pretty much the same guy. Jonah Williams is interesting to me, only in his 3rd year now out of Weber State, but I do see the athletic tools, and I see him winning in both phases. And there's a lot of times where, he's shedding blocks. He's doing a lot of the dirty work for this team. Not someone that graded out remarkably well, but I think as the year went on last year, he really came on. And maybe there's a world where he can become the best Jonah Williams in the NFL. I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic here. Copeland has been around a little bit longer than that. I feel like he kind of is what he is. But, as a 5 tech, as a 4-eye, he can shoot gaps and be a good 1-gap run defender. Really under-tooled, I suppose. Lacks the tools is probably a better way to say that as a pass rusher. But both those guys will be out there in those fronts, probably, eating 10 to 15 snaps a game. And then Kobe Turner is going to be, the one guy Rams fans are really excited about, rightfully so. They spent a 3rd-round pick on him. Definitely was a higher grade than I had on him, but I get it. His tape at Wake Forest was awesome. Only played about a half a year of truly high-level competitive football. He was a rotational player for Wake Forest as a 3-tech for him. He's undersized and lacks the arm length, but his technique and instincts at the position are incredible. And he's not Aaron Donald. We've really tried to find a lot of Aaron Donald types across the NFL, and NFL teams have tried to find a lot of these undersized guys. Solomon Thomas is the first guy that comes to mind, but it's not just him. These guys they're very hit or miss. You have to really play with incredible pad level and technique and continue to get stronger in the weight room to really, package as much muscle as you can at that lack of size. He's only 6'1", 290 pounds. That's a pretty easy move for a lot of NFL offensive linemen. So kind of a boomer bust pick, honestly, in the 3rd round. This team has had success with a lot of these undersized guys, though. And he's never going to be anything close to the player Aaron Donald is. I feel very confident saying that. But as a rotational backup to Aaron Donald, maybe keep him fresh through this year so that he doesn't completely break down into maybe 2024 where you might be a little bit more competitive. I love him in that role to give you maybe 80% of what Aaron Donald does as a 3-tech. I think as a 5-tech, rotating with Copeland and Jonah Williams, I think he can play that. And maybe as a pass rusher who comes in as a 3-tech for Bobby Brown. So, there's a lot of different ways they can use him. I think he's going to start playing 15 snaps a game, and they'll just kind of figure out what he's truly good at the next level. But an interesting 3rd-round pick. And then you got a couple more tweener types. I mean, how many of these guys can you really have? Michael Holt's already kind of one of them. You got Copeland, Jonah Williams, Ernest Brown, and Dejuan Johnson. It's kind of the balls in their court, I think, to try and make this team. I would argue that I think Jonah Williams could be a surprise cut, but Copeland might be the guy, if Dejuan Johnson or Ernest Brown really surprise, could steal that roster spot there, in which case keep an eye on them as that 5-tech, because both guys are decent enough in that role. But there's obvious concerns here. The pass rush minus Aaron Donald is the worst in the league, but you put Aaron Donald in the mix there, and it's enough to get them to 19th, which again speaks volumes about the type of player Aaron Donald is, even at this point. And then the run defense is a major concern. You pair that with the scheme, this could be catastrophic how bad this run defense is, and it might not even matter what the pass rush looks like. But again, even there, the Aaron Donald factor helps out a little bit. And what's rough is that D-line is probably the best group on this defense. because the linebacking group is a joke. You have Ernest Jones, who had a good year too, don't get me wrong, and he definitely took to Bobby Wagner's coaching as a run defender. His tackling consistency was awesome. I think that the arrow is certainly pointing up in how he reads out the run, and that's not your concern with him. He really wasn't good in coverage, just wasn't a playmaker, was not very instinctive, dropping into his zones in his second year. Now, year one, he did show a little bit more playmaking instincts back there, and maybe that can come along. I think he's a decent starter, and I think that's what he's going to be moving forward. Again, I think the arrow is still trending up. I think he can become a good starter, is really how I should have worded that, but it's not someone I'm stoked about necessarily. But, like, what the hell are they doing? They have to pick someone else up, right? Christian Roseboom has played like 12 snaps in the NFL. You can't start him, really. Jake Hummel has also not played. And then it's 4 undrafted free agent rookies that were on nobody's radar. So right now, this to me is not a fieldable linebacker group. Ernest Jones is a solid, young, intriguing player, but most teams have a guy like this, right? And then you literally don't have an NFL caliber player, in my opinion, as a second linebacker here, let alone depth. So maybe they see something in this group. I'd be surprised. It's a hard enough position as is. I can't believe with all those picks they had, they didn't draft any linebackers in this class. Like, imagine Servasia Dennis here. That'd be pretty exciting, but I digress. This linebacker room's a joke, and it's really not worth spending all that much time on, other than Ernest Jones is a nice player. Likewise with this secondary. Like, I get the approach. They want to play young players and develop these guys and get into next year with a couple starters out of this group. I don't know if that's going to happen, honestly. Like, I just don't know if the people that they're betting on, the players that they're betting on, are the right guys. So let's start with the cornerbacks. They're gonna rank 32nd for DB coverage, by the way. The one guy that I do believe in this entire cornerback room is Kobe Durant, who I loved this pick for them last year. My pro comp for Kobe Durant was Darius Williams, and I think he's better on the outside. I think he's physical enough to play in the slot and has the instincts to do it, so maybe he is their starting slot, to be determined there, but I think his best playmaking and instincts are going to be from the outside. Durant actually had 3 picks last year, but his coverage on a per snap basis was very up and down. But really good athlete, and I think he can be a starting corner for them. He just has to prove it. Beyond that, though, like, I just wish they had more exciting, intriguing young players here. Darian Kendrick, undrafted player that played a lot of snaps last year. He has a good eye for zone coverage, for reading the quarterback's eyes in such a zone-heavy system. He can basically play like your typical backup that isn't the worst thing in the entire world, but you can't run man coverage with him. He's going to get beat over the top. He's going to gamble and lose. It's just, for him to be your second-best corner, I can't defend this as a team-building approach, regardless of how many picks or how much cap space you had. You can do better than this. Robert Rochelle, who was, I think, a 3rd or a 4th round pick, entering year 3, has theoretical upside. It hasn't been there for him, but a lengthy guy with physical tools that really is the only guy in this entire secondary that fits your typical starting caliber tools from a physical perspective, but he doesn't defend the run well. He's a horrible tackler and doesn't really know what he's looking at in zone coverage. You have Trey Tomlinson, who some people are going to be excited about. I was not a big Trey Tomlinson guy. Now, in this system, likewise with what we said about Kobe Durant, there are some playmaking instincts there, and I think playing off quarters zone is where he showed his best tape at TCU, where he can use his quick first step and his playmaking instincts and his zone IQ to, splash as a pass defender, but he's remarkably grabby and he's terribly undersized. 5'8", on a good day, 170 something pounds. Like, Kobe Durant's at least filled out, and he's every bit of 5'8", 5'9". I think Tomlinson is actually more like 5'7" and a half. So maybe Tomlinson is a backup to Kobe Durant, but man, I saw a boomer bust coverage player that was one of the grabbiest players you'll ever see that's just going to struggle in coverage at the next level. I could very well be wrong about that, but man, I would be surprised if he turns into a starting caliber player. I think he's a decent enough backup. But then you also have Gary Vincent, who's an athlete, and it's about the best thing I can say about him. I liked him as a day 3 dart throw out of LSU, but he's been all around the league. I think he may have even been in the XFL for a little bit over the last couple of months. His IQ going back to LSU, he just doesn't see the field well in zone. So barring anything really clicking for him, you're not expecting anything there. And then it's a bunch of undrafted free agents that if you get anything from them, you'd be stunned. It's not even like undrafted free agents who I had on my radar or I liked. They could see something I don't. Let's see if these guys make the team first before we even consider them entering the lineup. So that group's going to get picked apart. And then on the back end, at least you have Jordan Fuller, who's not a great athlete, but is one of the smarter safeties in the NFL. Has a really nice trigger coming downhill. Really good in these quarters assignments, and I think he's going to be a good starter, and in a contract year could have a nice year, but the surrounding situation is so bad that it's going to be tough to have production. I really like what he does as a run defender, a really secure tackler, and a physical player. Plays well down and around the box. He's got size, so a good, complete, almost kind of jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type. I'm not going to say he saves this group, but at least you have a starter in this group. Russ Yeast is slated to be the starter. I'll list him there for that reason, but I'll believe it when I see it, man. Horrible year in coverage last year when asked to play. I think if he's starting, it's because they like his tackling ability coming downfield, and I get that, but Quentin Lake to me is the much better coverage player. Loved what his tape showed at UCLA. I love him in this system. And that duo with Fuller and Quentin Lake has the potential to at least be something that I could get moderately excited about. His dad played in the NFL, and I loved his zone IQ in a system just like this. So I really hope Lake can win that starting job. He was one of my guys in last year's draft. Between Fuller, Durant, and Lake, if you can walk out of this year feeling like you have 3 starters, that's at least something. They draft Jason Taylor, I think, in the 7th round, maybe the 6th. He's not a horrible athlete on the back end, and even his coverage tape was decent. But he was a 6th-round pick for a reason. He's not the most consistent coverage player, but he's horrible in run defense. All of the classic knocks on Big 12 defense apply to Jason Taylor. He just, for a deep free safety, didn't seem to give a shit against the run. He was late to trigger. He was a poor tackler. He took bad angles. It was a disaster. They got to inspire some confidence in his ability to play the run if he's ever going to play. But if they can do that, he's an athlete with some potential. So I didn't hate the pick. And then you got some really bad athletes, Richard LeCounte and Rashard Torrance out of Florida. Really didn't like Torrance's tape. I thought he was just too slow to cover on the back end. And LeCounte, I know why he's on this team. It's because he was compared to Jordan Fuller as a guy that had really good tape in college, but completely destroyed his stock with a horrible 40 time, just like Jordan Fuller did. So, maybe they find another Jordan Fuller there. It would be a pleasant surprise, though. It hasn't happened yet. Fuller was much more immediate coming into the league, certainly than LeCounte has been. And that wraps up the defense. So this is the 31st ranked defense. They're going to bud right up against the Arizona Cardinals. Really, the only reason they're above them is because, Aaron Donald is on this defense, and he is the ultimate elevator of a front 7. Beyond that, there's obvious concerns across the entire board. So 31st for pass defense and 30th for run defense. So with that, we can kind of paint the full picture here. Obviously, 31st overall as a team, 21st offense, 31st defense. And as I kind of described earlier, it is just how bad they are defensively, how far they are behind the 30th ranked defense that can explain kind of the math there. Man, fantasy points are going to be good for this offense, I'll say that, because they are going to be in a lot of passing situations with how bad this defense is going to be. And then on top of that, I'm worried about the special teams. Like, they already graded out poor last year. They had blocked kicks. They graded out poorly as far as their special teams, and that was with a good kicker in Matt Gay, who went to Indianapolis. So it's a bunch of young guys that'll be fighting for spots, but I don't see how the special team gets a whole lot better this year, and I don't know if that's going to be a major priority for them this year. It really is an interesting team where you love the coaching, you love the quarterback, you love Cooper Kupp, you love Aaron Donald, but other than that, it's like this is already a team that fell apart last year, and they fell apart even more. They lost 8 starters on the defensive side of the ball, and you have a quarterback who very likely, honestly, like, might not be able to get through the year. I know seeing the Rams at 31 seems a little bit too low for some people. And based on the Vegas over-under, maybe it is. You know, their Vegas over-under is 6.5 wins. Their Super Bowl odds of 70-1. To me, those seem really high. I look at their schedule, and they're going to be underdogs or worse, like heavy underdogs in a mass majority of their games. They don't have a particularly easy schedule. They have to play the NFC East, which we know is the best the best division in the NFC conference. You know, if they got to play the NFC North or the NFC South, I'd feel a little bit better about them, you know, scratching out 7 wins. But even then, I wouldn't feel great. And then they also have to play the AFC North. It's not like they get the AFC South, for example, which might be the weaker of the AFC. So, yeah, you got some pretty winnable games against Arizona, who we just ranked 32nd. And yes, Matthew Stafford, as long as he's healthy, is going to pull off some upsets. Sean McVay, with his coaching, is going to steal some wins. You know, for that reason, I've got them coming out maybe at 6 wins. But that's almost like optimistic in my opinion. I think this could be a 3 or a 4 win team if Stafford gets hurt, and that seems pretty, likely. And that's just a matter of when he gets hurt. Like, if he gets hurt early, this team could go all year without winning a game. I like this betting under 6.5 on the season. I mean, it's just, I get the coaching, and I get that you have some superstar talent. You know, one of the best receivers in the NFL and one of the best defensive players in the NFL. But even with that, I can't see this being a 7-win team, man. So ultimately, I'm very curious about what you guys think about this ranking of 31. Were you skeptical at first, and I convinced you that 31 is the right spot for the Rams as one of the bottom feeders in the NFL? Do you think this is too low and they will shatter the expectation of 31 here? Do let me know in the comments down below. Comments help the YouTube algorithm as well, and likes certainly do on top of that. So please, if you enjoyed, if you're still here and have not hit that like button, please help me out. Click that thumbs up real quick. We'll be back. It won't be a week in between every deep dive. We'll be probably every 3 days is about when you can expect these deep dives throughout the summer. So aiming for Sunday afternoon, maybe even Sunday morning for the reveal of my number 30 team. We're going to have our first guest for that one. So very much looking forward to it. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Enjoying the series so far. I hope you are as well. And we'll see you later. Peace out.